Joining us, Dan Kelly, the CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Dan, you heard from some of those business owners in that report, and obviously yesterday one of the big things that the government did, as we learned about there, was that program to try to provide some rent assistance. Does it come fast enough? Does it help enough? I mean, what's been the reaction you've gotten from your members over the last 24 hours?
Well, it's the first significant national movement to try to reduce some of the rent bills on the part of small and medium-sized business owners. And in that regard, it's good news. It's a first step. But there are no details of how it's going to work. And of course, it looks like it needs to be negotiated with provincial governments who have the power to deal with landlords directly. The way that it's apparently going to be structured is a loan to the landlord, and then the landlord would be required to pass along the relief to the small business involved, potentially with some provincial funding as well. There's a lot of ifs there for us, but it is a good step. We need to see provinces, though, step up and actually announce some real relief for rent. Only Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia to date have done anything in this regard. They've offered 5,000 one-time grants, but a lot more is needed, or we're going to hear stories like you've just reported over and over and over again.
I wonder what you make of the government coming out with these kinds of announcements when we're maybe not quite at the finish line. Obviously, the government's under tremendous pressure. The Prime Minister gets repeated questioning on all these different issues, and then something is announced. But even with the wage subsidy, which you've talked with us about, I mean, the time between it was announced and the time when ultimately that will be implemented is a time period too long, at least for some small businesses in this country.
It's a real concern. You're absolutely right. Many small businesses can't wait. Some have already made the decision to close their doors altogether. And every day that ticks by, more businesses are making the decision to permanently close. A CFIB survey over last weekend, we're doing another this one, but over the last weekend, the survey showed that 51% of businesses said that they do not, if the current restrictions last until the end of May, they may not be around at all coming back from the emergency phase. That's devastating. So yes, provinces do need to move faster. The federal government needs to move faster. I'm sympathetic because they're designing programs for things that have never been done before. They're trying to do them in a matter of weeks, and these programs typically would take months and months to design properly. But business owners can't wait. I mean, these bills are coming due, and they have nothing from which to pay them. We've had so many of our members already miss their April rent payments. Many are worried about how long this is going to take. Even if the emergency phase is wrapped up quickly, what is June and July going to look like in many of these companies where those bills are continuing to accrue? They've got back bills from months that they weren't able to pay, and only a trickle of income starting to come in from which to pay it. That's the concern that we're hearing from many business owners, is the tail effect of COVID-19, even once we're able to reopen, is likely to be a long one.
You know, as much as the federal government has made itself available to answer questions, and we're obviously going to hear from the Prime Minister again today, he's out there every day fielding questions, we don't get a lot of details on what happens behind the scenes to create these programs in real time. Maybe a great example of that is that Canada Emergency Business Account program, essentially giving businesses access to, $40,000 interest-free loan. They had that initial window of how much revenue the business had to have generated in 2019. They came out, they revised that yesterday. They didn't revise it to the extent that I know that your own organization had been calling on them to do. And so where's the disconnect here? I mean, why not go, if this is a government that's talking about, we'll do, everything's on the table, we can do whatever it takes. What is the dance here on sort of the specifics of the range of revenue that was generated in the previous year?
Look, we've been pushing the government on exactly that. The Canada Emergency Business Account, CEBA as it's known, $40,000 loans to business owners, only $30,000 you have to pay back, and interest-free during the duration. So it's become very popular. There are hundreds of thousands of these loans that have been taken up, and it is helping a number of very small businesses. But as you rightly said, that $50,000 payroll requirement was really cutting out thousands and thousands of businesses from relief. I get that the government has to get something out. They have to make these announcements, and they're trying to protect the Treasury, making sure that the aid is targeted to those who most need it. What I have seen, though, is a willingness on their part to make revisions as we go. So they did just yesterday lower the threshold to $20,000 in payroll. We've heard from many that that is going to be enough to allow them to get the loan. But still, those that are paying only with dividends to family members in the business, new businesses that didn't have a payroll in 2019, the self-employed and others with micro-sized payrolls are still cut out from it. And we are urging the government to make the program bigger, because that is the 10,000 that you're able to keep is real relief to businesses that then can use that to pay those rent bills. Again, deferring bills is helpful, but it's going to be an anchor around the necks of business owners when they reopen if we're not careful. We need to take some of these bills away. BC yesterday announced some property tax relief for commercial property taxpayers. That's the kind of stuff we need. Some of the provinces are doing some, but in Ontario and Manitoba, Alberta, unfortunately, there's not a lot of real relief for business owners in many provinces.
Dan Kelly, CEO of the CFIB, joining us. And Dan, one of the other developments this morning, initially reported by the Toronto Star, we're still awaiting more details, is whether or not we're finally going to start to hear about what you might call bailout assistance for different hard-hit industries. The one we talk frequently about here on BNN Bloomberg is the oil and gas industry, but obviously tourism, airlines, generally speaking, there are a lot of sectors that have been in need of aid. Maybe you can help us understand, first of all, are you expecting any announcements on that today? A, and then B, since we already have plans in place to get money into the pockets of Canadians, we have a plan in place to get wage subsidies available to businesses. You mentioned the program to get loans to businesses, and then yesterday the program to provide some rent relief to businesses. What do these bailouts entail? What's the helpful way to spend money or direct money to any of those sectors to address something that hasn't been addressed yet?
Look, the government is focused, I think, on the right things first. With the largest expense for most businesses is their wage bills. Second to that is rent, and we're moving in that direction. They provided some loans to certain businesses along the way. But there are more needs than that. And as I was saying before, the needs are not just during this emergency phase. For many, it is going to be after the COVID-19 emergency when they're really worried, especially, for example, in the tourism sector. What is July and August going to look like when our tourists going to be coming back to Canada from overseas, or even our U.S. and domestic tourists going to be visiting all our amazing places across the country? So there are some specific needs beyond then the general needs of the business community, and it would be certainly welcome news if the federal government does step in on those specific examples. What I worry about, though, is as much as we need sectoral support for tourism and oil and gas, we also need more supports for those very, very small businesses, those micro-sized companies. Unfortunately, there are a lot of them that are falling on the margins of many of the programs that have been announced. Helpful programs, but ones that cut them out. And that's where I would ask the federal government to spend a particular amount of the time. That's certainly been our message to Ottawa in our frequent communications over the last week or two. They're listening. They are making real changes as we go. Provinces do need to step up to the table as well. But if we're all in this together, we can't afford to leave some people out. And that's what's been happening.
All right. Well, it's good to get your take, Dan. Thanks very much. That's Dan Kelly, the CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business.